Picture the blindfolded statue of justice. Just, visualize her standing there.
Right, holding the scales.
Exactly, holding those scales, perfectly balanced. And the entire concept of justice, it literally relies on that blindfold.
It's essential.
It is. It demands this cold, unflinching objectivity.
Yeah.
It requires us to look at a conflict and weigh right and wrong without any bias, like without any favoritism at all.
Without peeking to see who's on the trial.
Yes. Without peeking to see if the person on trial is our friend, our family, or a total stranger. But now I want you to contrast that image with a completely different, very ancient human instinct.
The tribal instinct.
Exactly, that visceral, warm, incredibly powerful need to belong to a tribe. Because that instinct, it doesn't want to blindfold at all.
Oh, not even a little bit.
It wants to look at a crowd, recognize familiar faces, lock arms, sing the same song, and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that, these are my people, and I will protect them over anyone else.
It is the ultimate collision of the universal and the particular.
Right.
And you're totally right to frame it as a paradox, because those two fundamental human drives, the drive to be perfectly just on one hand and the drive to fiercely protect our own in-group on the other, they're fundamentally at war with one another.
Always at war.
And when we try to scale those drives up, up to the level of a modern nation state,
Yeah.
that internal friction becomes explosive.
Which brings us directly into the crosshairs of today's deep dive. Because if you're listening right now, and as a learner, you're probably someone who appreciates peeling back the layers of a complex issue without, oversimplifying it, we have an incredibly compelling mission today.
We really...
We're going to dissect a concept that instantly spikes the blood pressure of almost anyone who hears it. It is arguably the most deeply polarizing civic concept of our time: patriotism.
Yeah. It's a concept that basically operates as a psychological Rorschach test for people.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Because for some, the word evokes the absolute highest forms of self-sacrifice, civic duty and communal love.
Right, the noble stuff.
But for others, it triggers immediate alarm bells. It signals the precursor to xenophobia or exclusion, or just a willful blindness to historical atrocities.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are drawing today from a rigorously detailed philosophical framework. It originates from a source text titled Yapıştırılan metin,
which literally translates to pasted text.
Right, pasted text in
Right.
Turkish. But we are focusing exclusively on its English contents today, which provide this surgical breakdown of the philosophy and ethics of patriotism.
It's a very dense, very methodical breakdown.
Very methodical.
Yeah.
And the central driving tension we have to resolve here is whether patriotism is genuinely a civic virtue, like a healthy, beautiful form of localized care, or if it is inherently a dangerous moral bias.
A collective ego trip.
Exactly. An ego trip that inevitably corrupts our sense of justice.
But, to even approach making that judgment, we really have to recognize that the danger usually starts with a failure of language itself.
Also.
Well, that friction you mentioned at the very beginning often stems from the fact that people are using the exact same word to describe entirely different psychological and political phenomena.
Right, we're talking past each other.
Constantly. So we have to draw strict perimeters around what we are actually talking about when we say patriotism.
So let's draw those perimeters right now. Because if I go out and ask 10 different people on the street to define patriotism, I am going to get 10 wildly different answers.
Oh, absolutely. Everything from paying your taxes to
never questioning the military.
Right.
The spectrum is huge. But the framework we're looking at establishes a very specific baseline definition. It anchors patriotism in the concept of a special love or attachment to one's political community.
Yes, an affection for the land, the language.
The shared culture, the institutions. But crucially, and this is the key part, it couples that affection with an active responsibility for the common good.
And that pairing is the absolute linchpin of the whole text. It is not just a passive, sentimental feeling you get.
Like getting teary-eyed during an anthem.
Right. It's not just the fireworks. It is an active stewardship.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is how quickly that definition gets hijacked in the real world.
Yeah, the mutations are scary.
Very. The philosophical framework we're analyzing is meticulous about quarantining true patriotism away from its darker, highly destructive mutations.
Quarantining it, yeah.
Because if patriotism is affection paired with responsibility, we have to look at what happens when that affection morphs into something else entirely.
Right, and this is where the terminology usually just completely breaks down in public discourse.
Yeah.
People constantly, and I mean constantly, conflate patriotism with nationalism.
As if they're synonyms.
Exactly. But the framework separates them completely. Because if patriotism is an outward-facing stewardship saying, I love my country and I want to care for it, nationalism takes that natural affection and weaponizes it.
It turns it into a belief of inherent superiority.
Right. It shifts from, I love my country to, my country is inherently better than yours and therefore deserves to dominate the global stage.
Exactly. It crosses a very distinct line from stewardship into supremacy.
Which is a massive psychological leap.
It is. And from nationalism, the descent just continues, because then you move into chauvinism.
The text mentions chauvinism specifically. Right?
It does. Chauvinism introduces active hostility. It's an aggressive, belligerent pride that doesn't just say we are better, but actively dismisses or demeans outsiders as fundamentally lesser.
It's combative.
Very combative. And at the absolute bottom of that descent is state worship.
State worship.
This is the total fusion of a citizen's personal identity with the unassailable authority of the government.
So the state basically becomes a god.
In that state, the government is treated entirely as a deity. It is beyond criticism. Demanding accountability is treated as actual heresy.
So we have this spectrum laid out. On one end, active care and responsibility. On the other end, blind obedience and hostility. But I want to push back on this a little bit. I want to push back on how neatly we can actually separate these things in the human brain.
Okay, lay it on me.
Because, on paper, it is a very clean distinction. The framework makes it look so tidy. But if I have a profound, deep-seated affection for my own culture, my own history, my own way of life, doesn't human nature naturally push that affection into a belief that my way of life is actually better?
The grandmother's cooking phenomenon.
Yes, the grandmother's cooking phenomenon. I don't just love my grandmother's cooking because I grew up with it or because it's familiar. I genuinely start to believe it is objectively the finest cuisine on planet Earth.
Right, you lose the objectivity.
Totally. Psychologically speaking, how thick is the wall between localized care and arrogant tribal pride?
Well, the text suggests it is incredibly thin.
And help me
Right. Yeah, that is exactly why this philosophical exploration is so critical. Human nature absolutely tempts us to blur those lines constantly. The ego constantly wants to attach itself to something larger than the individual, right?
How to feel important.
And then declare that larger thing the best. It's an ego defense mechanism. But the difference between a society motivated by care versus a society motivated by collective ego, that dictates how that society behaves on the world stage.
And how it treats its own citizens.
Exactly. Because if your primary motivation is superiority, your goals fundamentally change.
You aren't trying to fix the poverty in your own cities.
Right, or improve your own schools. You're trying to prove you are wealthier or stronger than the nation next door.
It becomes about status rather than health.
Precisely. If we accept that true patriotism requires keeping the ego in check, the focus on stewardship rather than supremacy, we start to see the immense civic value it actually provides. A healthy society desperately needs that localized care to function at all.
So let's look at how that localized care actually builds a functioning society. Let's explore the light side of this concept before we get into the really dark stuff.
Let's do it.
The framework makes a really compelling argument for patriotism as a foundational civic virtue. And it says it's rooted primarily in gratitude, which is interesting because when I think of patriotism, my mind usually goes straight to fireworks, military parades, historical monuments.
The loud stuff.
Yeah, the loud stuff. I don't naturally think of the word gratitude, but the underlying philosophy here is that we are all essentially massive beneficiaries of a multi-generational inheritance.
We really are. We are born into this massive web of infrastructure, culture, and civic order that we had absolutely nothing to build.
We just showed up.
We just showed up. Think about the language we are using right now to communicate these complex ideas. Centuries of evolution, refinement, and shared understanding went into it.
And blood, sweat, and tears.
Exactly. Think about the legal frameworks that allow a stranger to sign a contract with you and actually trust that it will be enforced. Think about the literal roads, the sanitation systems,
Clean water.
the shared public trust that prevents a society from collapsing into absolute anarchy every single morning when people wake up.
It makes me think of an analogy. Imagine moving into a magnificent, fully furnished, historic house.
Okay.
You didn't lay the foundation for this house. You didn't chop the wood for the floors. You didn't hand carve the banisters. You just walked in the front door one day and suddenly you were shielded from the storm outside.
Right.
You have warmth. You have shelter. You have light. Now, you could treat that house like a cheap hotel room.
Just trash the place.
Yeah. You could scratch the furniture, leave the water running, and just consume all the amenities until you decide to check out, fundamentally disconnected from the space. Or, and this is the patriotic view, you could feel a profound sense of gratitude for the people who built it.
And maintained it before you got there.
Yes, and realize that because you are benefiting from this shelter, you actually have a duty to maintain it for the next person.
That is a highly evocative way to understand the civic responsibility at the heart of this philosophy. Because if the roof starts leaking in your historic house, you don't just stand there in the rain and say, well, I didn't build the roof, so it's not my problem.
Yeah. Right. Let someone else fix it.
You recognize that you live there. You own a share of the responsibility. Patriotism, in its virtuous form, is the psychological shift from being a transient consumer of a country's resources to being an active, responsible steward of its future.
It's an ownership mindset.
Yes.
And what does that stewardship look like in the gritty reality of a modern democracy?
Yeah.
Like, practically speaking. Because it's not just cheering at the Olympics.
No, not at all.
The framework suggests this gratitude translates into highly tangible, often very unglamorous civic actions.
The boring stuff.
The boring stuff. It's the willingness to pay taxes, honestly. Recognizing that this is just the cost of maintaining the plumbing of the house.
Right.
It's the willingness to vote, to serve on a jury, to volunteer in local communities, to defend democratic institutions when they are under threat. It's the fundamental realization that we owe something to one another.
And without that shared sense of ownership, public life simply disintegrates. It becomes entirely cynical and completely transactional.
Transactional is a perfect word for it.
Because if everyone in a society views the state as nothing more than a vending machine, where I put my tax dollars in and I expect my personal services out, the moment the machine jams, or the moment someone else gets a slightly better service from
The
it,
social fabric tears.
it tears instantly. A robust society requires citizens who look at one another and say, we are bound together in a common project, and the preservation of this shared life matters more than just my immediate individual convenience.
It's the social glue.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely see the beauty and the necessity of that. I really do. But if we follow this logic, we run headfirst into a massive moral pothole.
The big one.
Because the exact same mechanism that makes us care so deeply for our historic house and binds us so tightly to our roommates is the exact same mechanism that incentivizes us to lock the front door and ignore the people freezing in the rain outside.
Yeah.
The warmth of the inside only exists because there are walls keeping the outside out.
And here we reach the crux of the danger. The transition from the light side to the dark side of patriotism. And the text points out that it isn't always marked by a sudden, dramatic shift into fascism.
All right, it's not like a switch flips overnight.
Exactly. It is usually a slow, insidious slide down the slope of moral partiality.
The slippery slope of giving special moral weight to our people, which, on a micro level, feels perfectly fine. If I am maintaining my house, I obviously care more about my roof than the roof 3 towns over.
Right. That's natural.
But geopolitically, when an entire nation adopts that extreme moral partiality, the empathy for the outsider doesn't just fade, it gets actively erased.
Erased. That is exactly the progression the philosophy warns us about. It starts with the seemingly innocuous belief that our community is special.
We're number one.
Right. But without strict ethical boundaries, that quickly morphs into the belief that our suffering matters more than the suffering of outsiders. Then it escalates to the conviction that our national interests must be secured at absolutely any cost, regardless of the devastating external collateral damage.
So the end justifies the means, as long as it benefits us.
Exactly. And the final, terminal stage of that progression is the terrifying psychological state where our crimes are no longer viewed as crimes.
Our crimes are no longer viewed as crimes. That is incredibly dark.
It is.
But historically, we see it everywhere.
Everywhere.
If an adversary nation bombs a civilian area, it is universally condemned as a barbaric war crime. Rightly so.
Of course.
But if our nation does the exact same thing, suddenly there's a chorus of voices justifying it as a tragic but necessary strategic maneuver. It is the complete corruption of objective justice. Remember the blindfold? The blindfold is completely off.
Because the empathy has been weaponized entirely for the in-group. And what makes this so dangerous is how this corrupted loyalty is enforced from within. You brought up how it alters our perception of our own actions. The framework deeply analyzes how this toxic patriotism silences internal dissent. It creates an environment where loyalty is violently divorced from truth.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because we've all heard the rhetoric, we've all seen it on the news or social media. If you criticize the country, you must hate it.
Oh yeah, love it or leave it.
Love it or leave it, or support the troops, support the country, right or wrong. That mentality basically demands that you amputate your own moral compass as a prerequisite for citizenship.
You have to surrender your conscience.
Right. But how does a society culturally enforce that?
Right.
How do we go from the grateful, responsible steward of the house we talked about earlier to a blind, obedient follower who attacks anyone trying to point out that the house is actually on fire?
It happens when a society culturally redefines what loyalty actually means.
Redefines it.
Yes, if loyalty is defined as an uncompromising commitment to the ideals of a nation like justice or liberty or equality, then pointing out when the nation falls short of those ideals is the ultimate act of patriotism.
Because you're trying to fix it.
Exactly. But if a political faction successfully redefines loyalty as an uncompromising commitment to the state itself or to a specific leader,
Then any criticism of the state is instantly framed as an act of treason.
instantly. So the critic goes from being the person trying to fix the leaky roof
To being viewed as an enemy trying to tear the house down.
Exactly. And the historical record is just overflowing with the tragic results of this shift. This isn't just abstract theory from some textbook.
Real people died because of this.
Millions. The framework points to how patriotic fervor has been systematically manipulated over and over again to justify wars of aggression, the brutal colonial domination of indigenous populations, the systemic persecution of internal minorities, and the implementation of draconian censorship laws.
And the most chilling part is that many of the citizens supporting these atrocities, they genuinely believed they were acting righteously.
They did.
They weren't twirling their mustaches. They believed they were protecting their homeland.
It reveals how incredibly volatile this emotion is. The exact same psychological impulse, the love of one's community, can inspire a citizen to risk their life pulling neighbors from a flooded river.
Right.
And it can also be manipulated to make that exact same citizen cheer for the oppression of a minority group living across town.
It's wild. It forces us to ask a really difficult, foundational question about the ethics of favoritism itself. Like, are special attachments inherently unjust?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the most universal form of special attachment we experience as humans.
Yeah.
The family.
The family.
The framework uses this parallel explicitly to explore the boundaries of moral partiality. It asks, is it ethically permissible to favor your own family over strangers?
Well, of course. I mean, it is not only permissible, it is psychologically necessary and socially expected. We don't love all children equally. We love our own children most. If we didn't have that localized, intense family love, human children wouldn't even survive.
Right. But we inherently understand that family love has to have strict moral boundaries.
Okay, let's dig into this. Let's elevate this from the usual simplistic analogies to a realistic geopolitical scale. Imagine a massive global crisis, say a severe pandemic or a catastrophic famine.
Sure.
A wealthy nation naturally wants to secure medical supplies or food for its own citizens first,
Makes sense.
like a parent feeding their own child, right?
Yeah.
We generally accept that a government's first duty is to its own people. That's bounded partiality.
Yes.
But if I have a sandwich, it's completely natural and expected that I give it to my hungry child before giving it to a stranger.
Yeah.
But if I steal a sandwich from a stranger to give my child a second helping, I've crossed a line.
A major line.
Right. So translating that to the geopolitical scale, if that same wealthy nation uses its economic leverage to actively sabotage the supply chains of poorer nations, hoarding vast amounts of life-saving resources it doesn't even need just to maintain global dominance while millions elsewhere starve.
Then it's theft.
Exactly. We intuitively recognize that a profound moral line has been crossed.
Yeah.
It is no longer stewardship. It is predatory. So how does the philosophical framework map that boundary? How do we know when we've crossed it?
Your sandwich example perfectly illustrates what the text calls the concept of bounded limits.
Bounded limits.
Yes. The framework explicitly affirms that special love for a country is morally acceptable, but only as long as it operates within the strict boundaries of universal human justice.
Universal justice has to come first.
Absolutely. The moment your patriotism requires you to strip the basic human rights or dignity or survival from an outsider, it ceases to be a virtue entirely.
So you cannot use your love of country as a moral shield to deflect accountability for crimes against humanity.
Never.
Justice has to be the ceiling that patriotism operates beneath. Can't be the other way around.
Exactly. The framework states that our fundamental obligations to truth and to our shared humanity must always override our national attachments. Patriotism is healthy when it is bounded. Unbounded patriotism is a societal cancer.
Unbounded patriotism is a societal cancer. That's a powerful way to frame it. But defining those boundaries in the messy reality of global politics, I mean, that is incredibly difficult.
It requires constant vigilance.
Right. We can't just leave it at abstract warnings about unbounded love. We have to actively construct what a healthy, bounded, virtuous patriotism actually looks like in practice. Because if the historic house is constantly at risk of either falling into disrepair on one hand or being turned into a fortress that shoots at the neighbors on the other, how do we actually maintain the balance?
Well, the philosophy we are examining doesn't leave us without a blueprint. It's very practical in this sense.
Yeah.
It outlines three specific models or pillars that must be simultaneously active in a society to maintain a healthy patriotism.
Okay, let's go through these pillars.
And the first one directly addresses the danger of blind obedience we discussed earlier. It is the concept of critical patriotism.
Critical patriotism, loving your country enough to tell the truth about it.
Exactly.
That feels like the antidote to the my country right or wrong disease.
It is the absolute core of civic health. A critical patriot operates from a place of deep care, but refuses to let that care dilute their objectivity.
So they keep the blindfold on the Statue of Justice.
They insist on it. They refuse to whitewash historical atrocities. They do not hide or justify the nation's current crimes. They look at the society's flaws head on because they understand that a society cannot improve if it is living in a state of historical amnesia or active denial.
It's the difference between a sycophant and a true friend.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Because think about it. If you have a friend who is descending into addiction or just making terrible, destructive life choices, a sycophant will just pour them another drink and say, "You're perfect. I support you no matter what."
Right.
But that isn't love. That's enabling. A true friend looks them in the eye, risks the relationship, and says, "You are destroying yourself and you are better than this." A critical patriot holds the country to its highest possible ideals, precisely because they care about its soul.
That is a phenomenal way to articulate it. Critical patriotism treats criticism not as an act of subversion, but as the highest form of civic loyalty.
It's tough love for your country.
Exactly. Now, the second pillar shifts our focus from how we love to what we are actually attaching our love to. And this is the concept of constitutional or civic patriotism.
And this is a massive paradigm shift, because historically, national identity has almost exclusively been tied to blood, soil, ethnicity, or shared religious mythology.
Yes, ethno-nationalism. The belief that you belong to the nation because your ancestors are buried in the soil or because you share a specific genetic lineage.
Right, which inherently leaves people out.
Always. Civic patriotism completely abandons that tribal marker. Instead, it argues that our patriotic attachment should be anchored entirely to shared political principles.
To the ideas.
Yes, to the democratic laws, the Constitution, the values of civic equality, and the institutions designed to protect human rights. It replaces a patriotism of exclusion with a patriotism of shared democratic commitment.
Okay, as a learner listening to this, and someone who spends a lot of time analyzing how humans actually behave and process information, intellectually, this makes perfect sense.
It's very logical.
It is. Civic patriotism is infinitely more inclusive. It means an immigrant who arrives, learns the laws, and dedicates themselves to those democratic principles is just as much a patriot as someone whose family has been there for 10 generations.
Precisely.
But let me push back on the emotional reality of this.
Go for it.
Human beings are deeply tribal storytelling creatures. We bond over shared myths, shared history, and deep ancestral ties. Isn't a patriotism based purely on civic principles incredibly cold?
It's a common critique.
How do you get a population to feel the same gut-level, tear-inducing loyalty to a legal document or a set of abstract ideals that they naturally feel for a shared cultural mythology? Like, how do we get people to love a law as much as a legend? Doesn't it ask too much of human nature?
That is the most persistent and valid critique of civic patriotism. It really is. It is notoriously difficult to evoke intense emotional solidarity over a set of procedural rules or abstract constitutional rights.
Right. You don't write folk songs about the tax code.
You don't. It requires a highly educated, emotionally mature populace. But the philosophers advocating for this model argue that the alternative, relying on the fiery, intoxicating passion of ethno-nationalism, is simply too dangerous for a modern, diverse society.
It's too volatile.
Way too volatile. The warmth of tribalism almost always requires the fuel of exclusion. Yes, civic patriotism might feel a bit cooler to the touch, but it is vastly safer. It creates a society where unity is a daily choice based on shared values rather than a biological accident.
I see. It trades the dangerous heat of the bonfire for the steady, reliable light of a well-wired electrical grid. It takes more work to set up and understand, but it's far less likely to burn the house down.
Hmm.
I can see the profound necessity of it. So we have critical patriotism, which demands truth. We have civic patriotism, which demands attachment to inclusive principles. What completes the triad?
The third pillar is humble patriotism, and it acts as the ultimate safeguard against the collective ego we discussed earlier.
Humble and patriotism are two words you almost never hear in a political stump speech together.
Indeed, but without humility, the other two pillars eventually collapse. A humble patriot possesses a genuine love for their country, but categorically rejects the illusion that their country is morally superior to all others.
They accept that they're just one nation among many.
Exactly. They desire the prosperity and security of their homeland, but, and this is the defining boundary, not at any price.
Not at any price, meaning we will not secure our own comfort by exploiting the vulnerable beyond our borders.
Right.
We will not build our wealth on the backs of predatory trade policies or aggressive proxy wars.
Precisely. It is an acknowledgement that your nation is just one thread in a much larger human tapestry. It recognizes that international cooperation and global justice are not threats to national identity, but necessary conditions for a stable world.
So if a society can somehow balance on these three pillars, maintaining a relentless critical eye on its own flaws, anchoring its identity in inclusive democratic principles rather than exclusionary tribal myths, and operating with genuine humility on the global stage, it achieves that rare, genuinely virtuous form of patriotism.
That is the ideal state.
But the framework doesn't stop at the ideal, does it? It provides a diagnostic manual for what happens when those pillars start to crack.
It does. It gives us a roadmap of decay.
What are the warning signs of a society sliding back into the dark side? What should we be looking out for?
The philosophy outlines 4 distinct sequential stages of decay, 4 warning signs that patriotism is turning toxic. And the first stage is when patriotism becomes blind.
Blind, which is the direct failure of the first pillar, critical patriotism. How does a society actually go blind? I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. People don't just wake up and decide not to see things.
No, it happens through the systematic curation of memory.
Curation of memory.
Yes. A society goes blind when it actively chooses to sanitize its history curricula, when it starts banning books or narratives that highlight its past atrocities.
Erasing the uncomfortable truth.
Exactly. It happens when media ecosystems evolve into closed feedback loops, only broadcasting stories of national triumph and completely ignoring systemic domestic injustices. Blindness isn't just an inability to see, it is a willful refusal to look.
It's the institutionalization of denial.
Okay.
So once a society becomes willfully blind to its own flaws, what is the next stage of decay? Where does it go from there?
The second sign is when patriotism becomes exclusive. Having lost its commitment to inclusive civic principles, the society begins to aggressively redefine who counts as a real citizen.
This is where we see the rise of scapegoating. The dominant group starts pointing at immigrants or religious minorities or even just political opponents and says, you are the reason our country is struggling. You aren't real patriots.
Yes. The circle of the in-group is drawn tighter and tighter. Citizenship is no longer about shared values. It is about conforming to a highly specific, exclusionary cultural or ethnic mold.
So the civic patriotism pillar is totally gone at this point.
Completely demolished. And from there, the internal exclusion naturally bleeds outward. The third warning sign is when patriotism becomes aggressive.
Moving from internal scapegoating to external hostility.
Exactly. The humility is entirely gone. The third killer has fallen. The nation adopts a zero-sum view of geopolitics. It believes that for it to be secure and prosperous, others must be subjugated or weakened.
So diplomacy is out the window.
Diplomacy is replaced by belligerence. This is the stage of empire building, military overreach, and the explicit desire to dominate.
Which brings us to the final, terminal stage of this pathology. What does the framework identify as the absolute bottom of this descent?
The final stage is when patriotism becomes idolatrous.
Idolatrous. Using a religious term implies worship.
It is entirely intentional. At this stage, the nation-state has literally replaced God, morality, and objective truth.
Wow.
The state becomes the ultimate arbiter of what is right and wrong. If the state demands an action, no matter how horrific, no matter how profoundly it violates human dignity, the idolatrous patriot will view that action as inherently justified and righteous simply because the state commanded it.
The individual conscience is completely surrendered to the collective ego.
Completely erased.
This raises an important question for me about the mechanics of societal collapse. Because when you lay out those four stages, blind, exclusive, aggressive, idolatrous, it paints a picture of terrifying authoritarianism.
It's bleak.
Very bleak. But does an average citizen actually need to harbor deep, active malice to reach that stage of idolatry? Like, do they have to be actively evil? Or is it possible to slip into that terrifying psychological state simply by being morally lazy?
This raises an important question indeed, and the framework's answer is perhaps its most chilling warning. Active malice is not required.
Really?
Moral laziness is entirely sufficient to bring a society to the brink of idolatry.
So just going with the flow can lead to tyranny.
If you simply accept the comforting myths your society feeds you, if you choose the easy path of willful blindness because acknowledging systemic injustice makes you uncomfortable,
Yeah.
if you silently tolerate the exclusion of marginalized groups because it doesn't directly affect your daily life, you are actively feeding the collective ego.
You're greasing the wheels.
The slide into idolatry is greased by the silent compliance of well-meaning people who simply outsource their moral compass to the state. They allow the state to define their ethics, and by the time the state demands horrific actions, the psychological infrastructure to resist has completely eroded.
They wake up one day cheering for oppression, utterly convinced they are just being good patriots. It is a profound warning against the danger of an unexamined civic life.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale.
Having navigated through this entire philosophical labyrinth, from the highest, most demanding virtues of civic stewardship to the absolute darkest depths of idolatrous collective ego, I think we need to synthesize this for the listener.
We should.
We started this deep dive with a binary question. Is patriotism a virtue, or is it a dangerous moral bias? And based on this rigorously unpacked framework from the text, the only intellectually honest answer is it is entirely dependent on its execution. It is a vessel, and we choose what to pour into it.
Exactly. Patriotism is a profound virtue when it operates as an engine for gratitude, care, and civic responsibility. It is a virtue when it binds us together in a commitment to democratic ideals, and when that loyalty is strong enough to demand honesty, critique, and growth.
Right. It takes work.
It is the necessary foundation for any functioning society that wishes to be more than just a collection of self-interested consumers.
But the moment that vessel is filled with a sense of innate superiority, the moment it demands blind obedience and silences dissent, the moment it relies on excluding the vulnerable to define its borders, it ceases to be love.
It becomes a weapon.
It becomes a highly destructive, deeply immoral bias masquerading as a civic duty.
So what does this all mean for you?
Yeah, what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you interact with the political world around you?
Well, the philosophical text we've explored offers a brilliant defining metric to help you navigate this. It tells us that the ultimate toxic slogan is, "My country, right or wrong?"
The demand for a blank check.
Yes. The true metric, the philosophy argues, is the belief that my country is worthy of love only when it struggles toward justice.
Worthy of love only when it struggles toward justice. That changes the entire paradigm.
It really does.
It means patriotism is not the enemy of objective moral truth. Rather, true patriotism is constantly tested and refined by it. It requires active participation, not passive submission.
As we conclude this deep dive, the framework provides 3 profound internal reflection questions. These aren't meant to be answered quickly.
No, these are heavy.
They're designed for you to quietly ponder as you evaluate your own civic attachments. First, does your love for your country make you more honest about its historical and present flaws, or does it make you less honest?
That's a gut check.
Second, does your sense of patriotism expand your feeling of responsibility to others, encouraging you to build a more equitable society, or does it shrink your circle of empathy down to only those who look, think, and vote exactly like you?
And the third.
And third, can you maintain a deep, abiding care for your homeland while simultaneously looking across a border and seeing every single outsider as fully, equally, and undeniably human?
Those questions are the ultimate lie detector test for the health of our civic souls. They demand a rigorous level of introspection. And before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building entirely on the concept of constitutional and civic patriotism we discussed earlier.
Let's hear it.
If we truly accept the premise that a healthy, virtuous patriotism must be based purely on shared democratic values, civic equality, and a commitment to justice, rather than blood, soil, or geographical accident, it opens up a fascinating philosophical doorway.
Okay.
Could someone, theoretically, be a true patriot of a country they have never even visited?
Oh, wow.
Think about it. If a person living halfway across the globe fiercely studies, adopts, and advocates for the specific civic principles and constitutional ideals of a foreign nation, are they more of a patriot to those ideals than a native-born citizen who actively works to undermine them?
That is a brilliant extension of the text.
If patriotism is ultimately about a profound attachment to ideals rather than a mere attachment to geography, perhaps our concept of what constitutes our homeland is infinitely larger and infinitely more demanding than we ever imagined.
It suggests that our true homeland is not defined by borders drawn on a map, but by the shared, relentless pursuit of a just society.
And just like that, we find ourselves right back where we started, staring at the tension between the warm, inviting crowd singing the national anthem and the cold, beautiful, unyielding objectivity of the blindfolded statue holding the scales.
The paradox remains.
The lifelong civic task is trying to figure out how to honor the warmth without ever tipping the scales. We want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep challenging your own assumptions.